I'm a hair mineral analysis expert. I have a background in functional medicine, and I educate people using HTMA testing to maximize health, erase debilitating symptoms, and gain energy. I'm a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, and I'm constantly searching for high-performance pros from all over the world to bring you this human optimization podcast. My name is Lisa Pitel-Killah. Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. And I am so excited for our talk today with Amanda Hinman, the natural hormone solution. Discover why most thyroid diets fail. We all want to know that. And the missing piece. Amanda's going to tell us about that today. Certified functional medicine health coach and integrative nutrition health coach. She used to feel exhausted and overwhelmed, struggling with an autoimmune condition, namely Hashimoto's. Amanda founded a wellness clinic called the Hinman Holistic Institute, and together she and her team have helped hundreds of women overcome the terrors of Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, insulin resistance, anxiety, PCOS, and more. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here with you today and have this conversation. Very important.
Oh my goodness, such an important conversation. I feel like so many women, so many people in general have this issue, and some of the other ones, of course, that we've mentioned. But so let's start off and just talk about your journey, right? How did you end up here? Because it's always such an interesting story. I love hearing.
Yes. Oh man. Well, I truly believe, as I think most of us who are in the wellness space, there's some divine redirection that landed us here. I had personally been in the sports performance and fitness world for many years, and so we have that in common.
Yes, absolutely.
On the side of training athletes and working with really, robust training and strength training, conditioning, nutrition plans. And then I also happen to have 4 daughters. And during the pregnancy of my 4th daughter, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I have to be honest, it was a little bit of an ego check because at the time I was in denial. I thought, I am very healthy. I work out all the time.
How did this, right? How is this happening to me?
Yeah. How is this possible? Right. It was very unsettling. And to be given the prognosis initially that this is an autoimmune condition, you will take medication for life and it will just, you'll just have to manage it. Yeah. And that just did not resonate with me. So I had worked with some specialists, a doctor of osteopathy, really on this journey of learning more about what was happening on a deeper level, root cause level. But I will say I had a kind of a start and stop experience, some progress and some changes in my lab data and my biochemistry, but then it would kind of go back and fall back into the pattern of elevated antibodies again. And then about 2 years later, my oldest daughter was 8. And at the time, she had developed such extreme anxiety that she was having, between 10 and 15 seizures in a day.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, Lisa, it was gut wrenching because to see my daughter, who was this vivacious, witty, super intelligent, little girl, get to a place of where she had to be on 4 different benzodiazepine medications just to manage her seizure activity. I mean, she was totally lethargic, very, just a completely different personality type. And at that time, it was like, there's nothing that galvanizes your desire to gain information and answers more than seeing your child struggle, right? That's a place of utter powerlessness. And we were working with some of the most amazing doctors down at Lurie Children's in Chicago, all the specialists running all of the tests, the EEGs and everything that we can think of. And we were informed that there was no discernible reason for this seizure activity, no tumor, no lesion, no damage in the brain tissue anywhere. So that sometimes these things are hereditary. Yeah. And the best way to do it was to manage it with medication. And again, she would likely never drive a car because of the amount of medication and so on and so forth. And it kind of similar to my autoimmune diagnosis, it was like, that just cannot be the trajectory.
Yeah.
So that was really my catalyst to go back to school and study functional medicine science. I studied at the School of Applied Functional Medicine and really started to learn and integrate the much deeper root cause dynamics and interconnectedness in the body systems.
Mhm.
And the good news is, in learning how to understand hormone balance and neurotransmitter balance, how to help the body to detoxify our stress hormones, and the similar dynamic with my daughter and myself, it presented in two completely different ways, right? One with an autoimmune Hashimoto's, one with seizure activity in the brain.
Yeah.
Yet the changes and the approach that we took were similar in nature, which included some nutrient changes and some key nutrient deficiencies that we both had, as well as some behavioral changes and some stress mitigation, shifting and things like that. So in helping our body to balance blood sugar, to detoxify, and to really find optimal functioning. So in a 9-month time frame, she was able to wean off of all 4 medications.
Wow, that's amazing.
Ever since. Yeah, super powerful. In fact, it's kind of a little bittersweet. It was a really kind of a nice cherry on top this summer in June, because she has a dream of going to the U.S. Air Force Academy. She's going to be a senior in high school this year.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and one of the requirements is you have to go through very extensive health history and examination. And if you have had any past history of seizures, then you would normally be disqualified unless you have been medication free for 7 years and have a sleep deprived and awake EEG. That's totally normal. So we went for that test this June, and it was a different neurologist who had never met her before, but he's looking at her history, her medical history, and it was like, wait, so she was on 4 medications and had this level of activity, and now she has been medication free, seizure free since 2014. And we said yes, and he, you could tell that that was just out of the norm.
The shock.
Right?
It's the shock. Totally. It's like, how did that even happen?
Yeah, how is that possible? So, but it's really affirming. He's like, well, everything is completely normal. Shall give her the clean bill of health. So
that is amazing. Awesome. Wow. Wow, that's incredible.
And that same thing then applied to my Hashimoto's, and was able to put that into regression and totally have that be in a balanced place as well for my thyroid function.
Okay. And so I want to dial back just a bit, because there are some practitioners that obviously watch the podcast, but there's also a lot of just general public. So I want to make sure they understand. So what is Hashimoto's? Just explain antibodies and with regards to that, just so they understand the kind of premise of it, and then we'll move on.
Absolutely. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis is a diagnosis. So it's always, whenever we have a diagnosis, it's a label, essentially collection of dynamics and symptoms that a person is experiencing, and this label will kind of be the bucket that describes it. So in Hashimoto's, it falls under the category of an autoimmune condition, which means your own body's immune system is creating antibodies. In this case, they are thyroid antibodies that are creating inflammation in the thyroid gland. So, and the thyroid gland is located in the neck, is really responsible for producing primarily 2 different types of thyroid hormones, thyroid T4 and T3. And thyroid hormone is really the master regulator in the body. It helps to, think of it like the thermostat, right? It helps to turn on your cells in terms of cranking that thermostat up for increasing the activity and all of the functions that happen at a cellular level, or turning it down and slowing things down. So kind of the saying I like to refer to with clients all the time is, if your thyroid is functioning suboptimally, sluggish thyroid, that means sluggish everything in the body.
Cold hands, cold feet, less regular bowel movement, all those things, right? Yes. So those are some of the symptoms. And so let's go back to kind of the title that I started with, because I'm super interested in learning just more about what you've discovered, why most thyroid diets fail. So what do most people, I guess, start with? So when they know they have, or where they've been diagnosed with either Hashimoto's, which again is autoimmune, or just hypothyroidism, where do they usually start? And then why does that fail? And what should they be trying, or what road should they be going down?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. It depends on the approach. So typically when people discover, what's very common is when women discover that they have hypothyroid or sluggish thyroid, it's one of the most classic symptoms is weight gain, and metabolism starts to slow down. So when metabolism slows down, we tend to think of being more mindful of our food choices or how much we're eating, and starting to cut back on fats, cut back on calories, cut back on overall consumption as a way to, counterbalance that weight gain that you're experiencing as a result of hypothyroidism. A beneficial thing is to focus on some key nutrients. So in particular, the thyroid hormones, we need to have things like iron. Selenium is really important for thyroid. So I'd love to share the strategy of Brazil nuts. Just a handful, 1, 2, or 3 Brazil nuts a day have a great source of selenium.
Absolutely. Right? And very natural, obviously. It's a food product, but very rich in selenium. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. But one of the things that most people don't realize is that often hand in hand, it's actually not always, I can't say universally, but very, very common. There's a symptom of glycogen deficiency, which means our liver isn't able to store glycogen in an effective way and utilize thyroid hormones. So most of our thyroid gland produces what's called T4 thyroid hormone. And then in the liver is where majority of that T4 is then converted into what's called T3, which is the more bioavailable or cellular active form of thyroid hormone. However, if we don't have adequate glycogen stores in the liver, and our liver isn't able to effectively utilize that glycogen on a consistent ongoing basis, it has a hard time doing that T4 into T3 conversion. And so now all of a sudden we have a compounding problem. Sluggish thyroid means everything is sluggish, including that conversion and that storage in the liver. But once we have less storage of glycogen, now it's going to be harder to convert the T4 to T3 again. So it kind of becomes this like compounding effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and so I want to, before we get into estrogen, because I want to definitely touch on that, because obviously PCOS was in the list of the topics that I talked about in your intro, and it's really important. And so with regards to, because I know a lot of people, when they are diagnosed, for example, whether it's an MD or a functional medicine doctor, they'll give them just Synthroid. And they may not have the best results, right, on Synthroid. And so let's touch just a little bit on that, because there might be people listening, they're like, wait a second, but I have this, and they may not even really understand the mechanism of that and what that actually is.
Yeah, so Synthroid and medication is very common for thyroid support, right? And that can be useful in the sense that it can kind of help the body fill in some gaps of what it's not doing on its own. However, if your medication is a T4 only combination, again, it doesn't ever really address that potential conversion problem in the liver, right? Of converting T4 into T3, which is the more bioavailable. That's what the cells need to actually activate metabolic functioning, is a T3 form. And another thing that happens is sometimes it's not necessarily a matter of lack of production. It can be, but sometimes it's not even just lack of production. It's either lack of conversion from T4 into T3, or it is lack of receptor availability. So once we have that T3, having that T3 actually get into the receptors of our cells to be active, because cortisol is a stress hormone. We think of cortisol as a bad thing, but you actually need a certain healthy amount of cortisol in order to prime our cell receptors to accept and to activate T3. So it's this beautiful balance between all of our hormones, including cortisol levels, including hormone, and including even insulin levels. Because sometimes, again, if we have insulin resistance, that can block some of the receptors from activating T3 thyroid hormones as well.
Makes sense. Yes. And so let's dial back just a little bit now to revisit the estrogen, right? Because that the estrogen level might be an underlying issue when we're talking about thyroid function. So let's touch a little on that and talk about how that effect kind of comes into fruition.
Yeah, so an interesting statistic is that women are 2 times as likely to struggle with anxiety, especially women with hypothyroidism or sluggish thyroid function. And part of that is linked to estrogen's role, because estrogen, an imbalance or a heightened level of estrogen as compared to other sex hormones, can create anxious feelings and anxious thoughts in our mind, right? It can enhance the likelihood of having anxiety. And estrogen also happens to be a thyroid blocker. So the same thing that's happening in the liver is such an important organ because it's so critical in conversion and detoxification. But if our liver functioning, if we already talked about if thyroid functioning is a little slow and sluggish, it's not necessarily converting the thyroid hormone, and it may not be adequately detoxifying estrogen. So we can get where estrogen kind of gets trapped and gets continued to recycle around the body rather than removed and excreted out of the body. And now all of a sudden we have a buildup of estrogen, especially as compared to the amounts of progesterone. And excess estrogen, again, is a thyroid blocker.
Right. So proper estrogen metabolism is going to be critical. And so that, I mean, and we're always talking about, birth control and things like that. And again, just thinking about that, taking that into account and making sure that you're monitoring these things is going to be really important when we're putting those things in our body as well.
Yeah.
And so how do we go about fixing an imbalance? What kind of tactics, does someone use? And ultimately, I mean, I feel like the end goal for many people is energy, right? Just energy in general.
At the end of the day, that's really what we're getting all seeking is more vitality and energy. And honestly, thyroid function goes hand in hand with our experience of energy and vitality.
Right.
So two things that I'd love to share is really thinking about, again, the power of consistent mealtime, right? So helping to regulate our blood sugar and our glycogen stores so that we don't run into a glycogen deficient place in the liver and have to have excess stress hormones. But having smaller meals, maybe more frequently throughout the day, can help to, through timing and through meal selection, can help to balance those glycogen stores when our liver can't quite hold that storage yet on its own until it gets more optimal. And also fiber. Fiber is so critical because fiber helps with detoxification of estrogen. It helps with detoxification of all hormones, metabolites, but having soluble fiber. So when I'm kind of the lady who's known to talk about beans a lot because I think beans are powerful in terms of you don't necessarily need huge voluminous quantities in order to get a serving size of soluble fiber. So things like black beans, kidney beans, garbanzo beans, all of these good things that you can add into and get creative as side dishes or mix it into a meal. Those are really great ways to help support overall nutrition and thyroid health as well.
Amazing. Yeah. And some great suggestions with regards to just in general, having more meals. I find one of the things too is not eating, when we're waking. And I feel like that's hard on the thyroid when we're not eating, within kind of that hour of waking, just because we're not fueling the fire. We're not starting the body. How do you feel about that?
I do agree. And it tends to be typically, cortisol is highest in the morning, and we want to have, again, some ability to have our body take on some glycogen stores from the food that we consume, as opposed to relying on cortisol to boost our blood glucose level. So I would agree, having some food, and again, thinking about breaking our fast, breakfast, right? The first signal of the day in terms of, I always like to, I say to members of our community all the time, you can't fake out your nervous system. So in the morning, you can't, no matter, even if you're like, oh, it's going to be you can't fake it out. And one of the most potent signals to your nervous system about the status of your world and the safety of your body's survival is going to be in the form of the food and the liquids that come into your body. So when you give it things that are going to be highly stimulatory or that are going to be sugar-laden, chemical-laden, toxin-laden, that's going to give a signal of stranger danger to your nervous system. Absolutely. But if you have, some nice healthy, protein, some eggs and some fiber and some real whole fruits and vegetables, now your nervous system is like, oh, cool. Yeah, this is all the stuff that we need to do our job today.
Yeah.
we're A-okay, right? So
Yeah.
what types of foods are you signaling first thing in the day?
Exactly. Well, and I feel like to a certain extent, I feel like some of it is a bit of a misunderstanding. We're talking about intermittent fasting. A lot of people, it's a hot topic nowadays, right? But I feel like a lot of people will take the fasting like from the time they do the 12 hours, right? And then they do the extra 4, but it's in the morning. So they're getting up, they're not eating for 3, 4, even 5 hours. Whereas maybe, eating as soon as you get up to address what we just discussed, but then shutting down your eating window a little earlier at the end of the day rather than in the morning, right?
Assuming if you have nourishment throughout the day,
Yeah.
and then you give your digestive system a time to rest and really do its job, that actually is for many people, that's a more beneficial strategy, is to shift those hours.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's an important thing. And so tell me, just every day, a few things that we can do. What are your favorite things just with regards to hormones? I mean, especially if someone has hypothyroidism and if they've been diagnosed, just a few things they can do every day to help support the body and how, and how that's affecting them.
Yes. And I love to start off with morning minutes. Again, we hear about the benefit of a morning routine, and I know it's almost platitudinal because it's so common, but it is so transformative to start, even if you think of at a minimum, the first 10 minutes of my day. Again, what am I signaling to my nervous system?
Yeah.
If you can prioritize those first 10 minutes of your day to be in a place of centeredness, calm, ideally maybe even appreciation or enjoyment, that is going to be so powerful because of what we call the HPATG axis, right? The hypothalamus and the pituitary in the brain are constantly assessing the status of your world, both internally and externally, how you're perceiving your environment. And that right away is going to signal to the thyroid and then to the adrenals. So it starts with your awareness. Like, it starts in the brain. It starts with, how am I feeling today? What are the signals? What's the biochemistry? If you can get in the habit of practicing starting the day in a place of calm, peace, like I said, appreciation, centeredness, that is night and day difference than rather than jumping out of bed or running into the next thing, your to-do list of 100 things. And I know, like, we're all busy, right? That's life.
Yeah.
But it's a discipline. It's a discipline too.
Yes.
So the morning minutes, I think, are critical.
Yeah.
The other one is breathing breaks, right? So when we think about the generation of ATP or the transfer of energy at a cellular level, in the citric acid cycle, there are so many steps that require oxygen. And we don't even think about it. It's something that happens unconsciously, breathing. So because we don't think about it, oftentimes we're in that short, shallow breathing, kind of a stress response type of breath. But even setting a timer on your phone 5 times a day, just like breathing break, and stop and take 5 breaths where you inhale slow for 4, hold 4, and exhale slow. That again signals to your vagus nerve and your nervous system, hey, things are good, things are a-okay. We don't have to have more stressors. We don't have to have that fight or flight response. I can do my job and relax. And that all supports thyroid health so tremendously.
Amazing. And, I still want you to continue because these are really good, but I always say, so I feel like some people are, I don't have time to meditate, right? It has to be this big production of an hour-long time that people just don't think that they have, or they don't want to make time for. And so I love the fact that you've talked about breathing breaks, because I always think, it's great to just sit, even if it's, turn your chair around at your desk, or if you can get outside in the summer. I love taking my shoes off and walking in the grass with my bare feet and just taking like 10 deep breaths. You literally change your existence by doing that.
Yeah.
You feel like it's like everything that was important, a minute ago isn't quite as important now. It's like, it's still there, but you've changed your demeanor towards it. I find that that's amazing. And it's so easy to do.
Yeah. And you know what, Lisa, thank you for sharing this again, because we're reiterating things that are very common knowledge. It's the difference that I always like to say, like 3 levels of knowing, right? Because a lot of times we're like, oh yeah, I know that. Well, the first level of knowing is having a conscious awareness of it. Like, oh, I know logically that breathing more would be good for me. The second level of knowing is you're actually practicing it some of the time and you're seeing the benefit. And the third level of knowing is it's just true for your experience, it's your beingness, right?
Yes.
So I always talk about like, what would it look like for us to have that third level of knowing on a lot of these tools and strategies that we're referring to, right? Or that's just part of our beingness. It's just how we be. It's how we live.
Yeah.
Because that is really where the true transformation takes place.
Exactly. Well, and would you say, I mean, I know sometimes it's hard. So I want your opinion on this, because I know that there's a higher likelihood of having thyroid issues when we are sedentary, right? When we're not doing some regular physical activity of some kind. And so, but I also know that if someone has a sluggish thyroid, you've already said this, we're not going to have a lot of energy or as much as we used to. We're going to have sluggish, our body temperature is going to kind of be low. Our liver's probably not working fabulously. So there's a lot of things to consider. So what would be kind of one of the best moving practices for daily movement, or even a couple of great practices that people could utilize to be able to just support all of that a little bit?
Yes, I love walking is awesome. So even getting outside, especially if you can be outside, fresh air, walking and moving is so powerful. And that can be fairly accessible for getting started, especially if you don't feel like you have much energy, but just simply, hey, it doesn't have to be at a rigorous pace necessarily. It doesn't have to be uphill, but just simply the fresh air and the movement of walking, for start with perhaps a couple times around the neighborhood or a couple blocks, and then see if you could build from there. Another thing that's really powerful is when you think of our lymphatic tissue, right? So our lymphatic tissue is literally all over the body, and it does not have an intrinsic pump. So different from our cardiovascular system that has the heart to move blood around the body, our lymph tissue is stagnant if we don't move it. So in the realm of flexibility, especially torso and core flexibility, thinking of moving in the different ranges of motion, like side to side, literally bending and reaching and stretching, one arm over the head, one side, the other side, turning rotation, left to right, across the body, and, flexion, bending forward, stretching back. So the more, and that's a big range of body, like that whole core from shoulder to hip, the more you can maneuver and have agility through that range of motion is beneficial, because you're moving that lymphatic tissue as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's important for detoxification.
Yes.
People don't realize that that's so important. And you know what? And I think that when we talk about, even just in general, you don't have to be athletic or an athlete, but just in general, when we talk about physical activity, in our minds, we are predisposed to think about, I have to get to the gym, or I have to go for a run, and we think past where we should be focusing to start, right? Which again is going for a walk. And not only that, if we're around our neighborhood, we're talking to people, that's, we're releasing more oxytocin, right? So now we're happier and so there's so many other things involved in all that. So it doesn't have to be aggressive physical activity that we all seem to relate when those words are mentioned.
Absolutely. And make it fun. Like sometimes even turning on the music and having a dance party in your house with your kids or something, it can be, just easy. It doesn't have to be this production. And that's actually probably the way it's going to be more sustainable.
That was exactly right. And I feel like that's probably a huge part that's a big part of what you do, is what you're doing. It's a lifestyle change that's for life, right? Because, there's ways to be able to solve problems and deal with conditions and what have you, but it's not a short term, health isn't A to C and then we're done. It's a journey, right? Not a destination. Exactly. And I think that's important too.
And one thing too, Lisa, that I like to mention, one of my favorite books to share is called The Healthy Deviant by Pilar Gerasimo. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but she does talk about how truly, unfortunately, it's unfortunate, but it's also accurate, is in today's 21st century, like in today's society, that to live this way of life where you're optimizing your body and minimizing chronic dis-ease in any sort of fashion is to be counterculture. Because literally the statistics out of Mayo Clinic show us that less than 2% of the adult population can expect to be healthy, happy, and stay that way. So that's startling. 2%.
2%. That's staggering.
It is. It's like, what is that setting us up for? What that means is if we're doing what's common, what's around us, then we're setting the stage for chronic disease. Wow. Right? So that's a really uncomfortable thing to come face to face with. So I actually think getting involved in immersion, looking for communities, finding friends, looking for mentors, looking for other people who are interested and prioritizing and value their long-term health is one of the single biggest game-changing steps that you can take, because we're influenced by the 5 people around us the most often. Right. And if the 5 people around us most often are going to end up in that 98% that are struggling with one of the most top, whether it's cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, then type 2 diabetes, then that's a strong influence, right? So you have to intentionally choose your influencers, your community, your support systems, your guides, your mentors. That is a powerful realization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, kind of going back, because we started off talking just about Hashimoto's, about thyroid and all of this, what would be, somebody listening now, they're like, well, I don't have a ton of energy. Maybe I'm not feeling my best. And so what would be, again, I just want to touch on maybe a few of the symptoms that go hand in hand with maybe thinking about approaching someone like your institute or your medical doctor to talk about thyroid and get thyroid checked. What are some of the symptoms that could be happening to them specifically, or just in general, I should say, that they may be experiencing, where a light bulb goes off and says, I think I need to get that looked into?
Yeah, so things like, obviously, like we said, weight gain, low energy, fatigue, hair falling out, you notice more significant hair loss, cold fingers and extremities and feet, low motivation and low desire. Also, if you notice digestive distress, so constipation or bloating, things where you feel like your body is not functioning well, dryness in the skin and your eyes, that can be another sign as well. Poor sleep. I mean, literally, it goes across the gamut of everything, whether we're talking about like sleep, skin, temperature, mood, weight. All of these things are impacted by thyroid function because it affects every single cell in the body.
Absolutely. And so I want to finish off. So, one of the things that I definitely see quite often is that we're only testing sometimes one measurement for thyroid, right? We're testing TSH, right? Thyroid stimulating hormone. And so let's just touch on we've now identified the fact, let's just say that we feel that our thyroid needs to be looked at. And, and we go to wherever we're going and they order a blood test and it has one marker on it. Let's talk about that marker and let's talk about the other markers that should be looked at to have a full picture of that thyroid so that they understand.
Yes, great topic, Lisa. So the most common, as you mentioned, is TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, which is actually really testing a measurement from how the brain is signaling to the thyroid gland to produce hormone, right? It's stimulating. It's a measure of how much are we stimulating the thyroid to produce hormone. It's not actually a measure of how much hormone is the thyroid gland capable of producing. So that goes back to our T4 and T3 discussion that we were mentioning earlier. And typically, I usually suggest that you request the forms free T3 and free T4, because all hormones have a total amount and an amount that's actually available for use, which is the free amount that's not bound by other binding globulins. So when you're looking at free T3 and free T4, those are going to be very useful to get a sense of like, okay, how much production is actually happening? And then comparing T3 to T4, how well is my liver converting from T3 to T4 or from T4 to T3? Because predominantly the gland itself will make T4 version. So those are two markers that are helpful. And when we look at reference ranges, those reference ranges are indicating what is essentially 2 standard deviations or 95% of the population tested at that lab. It doesn't necessarily tell us what is optimal functioning. So many times we'll have a number will come back and be even total or T4, free T4, free T3 will be within the reference range. However, it may be far from optimal. So as a kind of over general rule of thumb, we want to look for it to be in the top third of the reference range, as opposed to the bottom third or even in the middle. That would be ideal. Another indication would be looking for those antibodies. So TG antibodies and TPO antibodies. Those are 2 different types of thyroid antibodies that could signal if it is in fact an autoimmune dynamic like Hashimoto's, where there's some autoimmune component as well. The final one is called reverse T3. And this can show us if our body is trying to deactivate because of its prioritization for other stress hormones. So we can look for a reverse T3 number, and you want that number to be on the lower side, because if it's elevated, that means there's some other form of stress or inflammation in the body that's galvanizing resources instead of thyroid.
Makes sense. And I feel like, I don't know who said this, it was a long time ago, but they said reverse T3 can be referred to as the hibernation hormone. Right? You just want to curl up in a nice blanket and go to, have a nap. That's kind of when that's high, you just kind of feel like you're a bit demotivated and want to have it's nap time. So that kind of stuck with me when I heard that. I was like, oh, that makes total sense. I like that. I like that one. Yeah. So again, so important to have the whole picture, because I feel like you've just given us reasons why it's so important. And especially when we do have the possibility of antibodies, and sometimes it can be hard to get people to test antibodies. Right? Sometimes that's a bit of a fight, and antibodies can change, right? Some people, doctor, I tested you a couple of years ago and they were fine, but they might not be fine now. Right. So it's important to have those checked every once in a while, along with all of the other markers, just to make sure that we're getting, again, that big picture and getting our energy back ultimately with all of these, with all of these systems. And so tell our listeners and our viewers how they can find you, because obviously you have a health institute, your team works with, is it specifically women that your team works with?
Women, yes.
So specifically women, and how can they get in touch with you and get a hold of you? And then we'll share that in our description as well.
Yes, absolutely. You can simply go to hinmanholistic.com. That's HINMAN holistic.com. And I'd love to share, Lisa, if it's of interest to your readers or to your listeners and your audience, I have a gift that's 3 steps to decrease bloating in 5 days. So I'm more than happy to share that link, and you can put that in the notes as well.
That will be in our description. Absolutely. So make sure you check that out. Make sure you download that. I can't wait to read that. And thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing today. This was fantastic. I feel like sharing this type of educational information is always so important. And even if one person watching or listening walks away and has an aha moment, then we've done our jobs.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I think we're both so passionate about.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my channel. We have a brand new episode every 2 weeks. Give this episode a thumbs up. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast host, make sure you give this episode a like, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to today's show. Head over to Pitel-Killah.com to gain access to some amazing free resources that will help you gain energy, erase debilitating symptoms, and be the best version of you. Remember to give this podcast a like and follow me on social media at Lisa Pitel-Killah. I'm here every 2 weeks with a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. Until next time.